What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Road to Redemption podcast. I'm, as always, your grateful host, Cam Williamson, and today I will be discussing the benefits of reading fiction. It's important. It's something that's covered all throughout book clubs, parenting groups, all across the internet that I've seen so far. I see it in reviews. I see it in critiques. Why would a grown person read fiction? It's not real. You can go out and learn something real about the world. Well, in my opinion, there's a lot of reasons to read fiction novels. Let's get right into it. The first one being, I think fiction is an easy way to ease children, especially younger people, into reading. It's hard to have a young person know about someone or something that they care about so much that they're willing to sit down and read about it in the age of technology, the internet, quick form content, right? So right there, fiction it's an escapism, of course. We're escaping our real life to jump into this world. And right there, it's good because you can teach a distinction. Some worlds are good to jump into. Some worlds are not so good to jump into. Why? Where attention goes, energy flows. What you give your attention to is kind of what you become, sort of thing. So you want to let kids know it's great to read things about crime or criminals and superheroes or whatever, but understand this is not real. Those are important conversations to have, not just in books, but with video games. So right there, fiction is opening dialogue. And on the topic of dialogue, reading fiction, just reading in general, but reading fiction helps improve your vocabulary. I can't tell you how many times, to the point where I have a journal that sits by my couch out there. Anytime I'm reading a book and I don't know what a word means, I don't just skip it and be like, I get the general context of what's going on in the sentence. I stop, I grab my phone, and I look up the meaning. And now I have a whole journal full of meanings that I'm like, well, I just never knew that word before. I've heard it, I've seen it used, I kind of get how it's used in context, but I don't actually know what that word means. So that's good. You get to improve your vocabulary. You also just improve your dialogue. You improve the way you speak. It helps you give your own vocabulary a very wide range where maybe you heard something that you connected with in a story one time, and the way that character said something goes, that's so better, expresses the way I feel about life in a much more artistic way, and it gives you an artistic expression to go out and live your life. On the same token, reading fiction inherently brings out creativity and imagination in a person, because movies like Avatar are so big for this, where you engulf yourself in the world so much, you go, I see what they did there. This is what I would do if I was here. This is how I would act if I was in this situation. And then you get things like fan fiction, where they take actual stories that exist and they create their own fictional stories off of the already fiction story. It's something where if you're willing to understand it for what it is. This is hard for me to do, especially as a romance novel fan. Most romance novels are fiction. So when you're reading them, the reason you're engulfed by the story, it's the drama of the toxicity. Will they, won't they? Did she, didn't she? Did he, did she? All this stuff. And the toxicity of it is what gets your blood boiling, because then you're like, I remember when that bitch, And it gets you to a place of connection that, if not properly done, is hard to do with nonfiction. It's not so hard to world build in nonfiction because we know the world we live in. It's very hard to buy into a story that someone has built a scene for you. Even someone like Nicholas Sparks, who always bases his books around the same, North Carolina coastal region, you still have to buy in to what the characters look like, what they move like. When I'm reading fictional books, I kind of have my own movie going in my head, right? So that's why when you see a movie first and then read a book, Yes, you probably, if you see The Notebook and then read The Notebook, yes, you're probably picturing um, Ryan Gosling and I forget Rachel McAdams. You're probably seeing them as you're reading the story because you've seen the movie. But if there's no movie made or anything like that, you're creating up your own, right? And that alone opens you up to connecting with these characters because in a sense you're creating them yourself. Yes, they can tell you this character has long dark hair, muscular, skinny, perfect figure, whatever. But you are creating them in your head. You are connecting with them. You are deciding in your own world whether they live or die. Do you close the book? Do you keep reading? That's up to you. It gives you a sense of control. So that's where the escapism part comes in when life is chaotic and you see people really just diving into some novels and just cranking series out. And you're like, hey, man, is life going okay? Not saying it's not great to love reading. You read as much as you want to read, but sometimes you have to ask yourself, why are we wanting to escape into the land of dragons and fairies and all this? I'm reading a Court of Thorn and Roses right now. And, you know, some of those I've always struggled with. I've always struggled with being able to picture such fantasy type things as pixies, fairies, goblins, the sort. The first time I entertained it was when Kristen Stewart, I forget how you say it, from Twilight did the Snow White movie. That was the first time that I go, okay, I like this. I think this is good. Game of Thrones did nothing for me. Those type of, like, Avatar does nothing for me. I've never seen any Star Wars or Star Trek movies ever. I just don't get into that kind of thing. So therefore, like, all the people that read sci-fi fiction, I would love for you as a collective, like, battle it out in the comments or something and go, this is the book we present to you, the science fiction collective, as our best one. And please don't bring me Star Wars or Star Trek. I don't care. The movies have been around my entire life. I don't care. I get the storyline of guy, space, I'm your father, pew, pew, pew. I get all that shit. I just simply don't care. Okay? And that is another awesome thing about fiction. You choose. You get to choose, again, whether these characters live or die in your own life. Do I entertain this? I used to be steadfast on if you start a book, you should finish the book. Give the author the credit that they started writing it. It took them through a process. They finished writing it at a point that they thought it was good enough to be read. Here's the thing. I think you can tell. It's hard to say with the way books are laid out today. It's kind of sporadic. But from what I've understood, fictional chapters tend to be, fairly shorter, especially in romance novels. They're anywhere between 6 to 30 pages for a chapter. Where, when you're reading autobiographies and stuff like that, like I said in Prince Harry's, some of them were just a snippet, and that was the chapter. So it's hard to really say that fiction makes you a better reader, because sometimes when reading is easy and you're flowing through a book and you're picturing it in your mind, it's harder than taking incoming information and comprehending it and analyzing it, right? You're not really doing that with a fiction book as much. You're gliding through the breeze of entertainment. Here's my favorite part of reading romance fiction. You gain such empathy for characters or perspectives that you could not possibly understand in real life, right? You may never meet someone who has a certain addiction in their family, suffered from a certain type of abuse. I mean, guys, I've learned things from books that I've then looked up and been like, wait. People actually deal with this in real life. Like, I thought it was just some crazy thing in a fiction book. I saw that, like, farmers fall in a grain bin, and that's like a real problem for farmers. Being up there, they're doing whatever they do, they fall in, they get collapsed in, and they die. I didn't learn that from a history book or from talking to a farmer one-on-one. I read a fictional book where dude falls in the hay. I don't even remember what book it was or something. I saw something. And I was like, oh, let me look that up. It gives you a perspective where you go, I'm not even in that world. I like visiting other states via text, via book, and going, a lot of books are based in New York. I've always wanted to visit New York, but I've learned so much just through fictional books that, like, there's more to New York than, Times Square. There's an outer part, there's a country part that's like more rural. I would have never, from being from Ohio, you think New York, you think, it's, Times Square, Madison Square Garden, whatever. That whole area, it's lights, it's a big city. No. Same thing, Portland, Oregon. I've seen a lot of books that are based out of Oregon, and I'm like, yes, I know it to be a pretty liberal place that kind of flies by the seat of their own pants. They do kind of what they want. But then you see a whole different side of it where, like, there's this cool artistic culture and, art movement and musical movements going on there. And you're like, wow, I would never really learn that. But when you get an author that's writing a book that's fictional, doesn't necessarily mean it's not based off true inspiration from their real life. So in a sense, you still get to see the way the author sees the world. Stephen King is one that has always concerned me because I go, dude, you see the world funny. You who walks around that noggin, you see things funny because you created it. You created Pennywise the Clown. That came from your mind. Same thing with the Michael Myers and the Jason Voorhees and all these guys. I like them during the Halloween times, but those guys are walking around for the other 11 months out of the year who created those characters. Thinking of these stories, and that means that they're walking through the streets drawing inspiration, going, what if Mike just snatched that lady from behind that tree and just started clubbing her head in with the the cross pipe that he found out in the street while he was passing a construction yard. Maybe I make that into a next scene. And you're like, but then we go nonfiction side of the house. You got Texas Chainsaw Massacre, arguably more jacked up, Real Deal Holyfield. So you go, what's came first, the chicken or the egg? Did we create crazy by fiction and telling stories, or is crazy inherent and we reflect it through art? Scary. I like the community that fiction offers. It's not... Okay, if you have a father who is, or any male figure in your life who's over the age of, we'll say, 48, he probably at one point went through a phase where he watched Band of Brothers, was a big fan of Platoon, did a lot of World War II and Vietnam research, meaning they read books on the subject, gaining different perspectives, right? But also movies were made around that time, like I was saying, Platoon. Platoon was a movie. It wasn't a book, but I'm saying they consumed a lot of nonfiction content about war and stuff like that. So nonfiction became like if you want to learn something, read nonfiction. And through different movements of art in time, especially coming out of the 50s and 60s, music really picked up. Now we're talking post-Vietnam, so look at the 70s had disco, 80s had hair rock and stuff like that. The 90s, huge, especially for me, I'm a 90s kid, huge movement in fashion and music and change. We've always been about 10 years behind the UK, so we get a lot of our fashion and music from the UK. But in the sense of literature, I think America does a pretty good job. Right? I think we have the freedoms to be so expressive here that a lot of other places don't have or have just newly gotten, so they're not as free and nimble. Now, one thing I'll say when it comes to the fictional novels, it's easy to get caught up in a world, I want to warrant against that. The Lord of the Rings and the Star Treks and the Twilights when it was at its peaks and the Harry Potters and the stuff. It's fine to love a series. It's not fine to dedicate your real life to not real characters, right? If anything has taught us that, just look at Daniel Radcliffe and who he is as a person and his disdain almost for that character and why. It's like he can't shake it. He is a person that's outside of that character. And it's like people sometimes lose themselves in fiction. You know, I've never truly understood the whole Renaissance Fair thing if you're not going almost to it just like as an event that's fun to go to. But if you're going and these are my people, this is my time, and you're doing all this LARPing shit, and you're preparing all year long, you're so lost in a time that's not now. That's when I start to worry because, again, reading itself, it can be a form of escapism. Reading fiction, especially because you're reading about things that are not real. And then I'm not going to like try to erode any genres here, but obviously some genres offer less than others. If you're reading about galactical battles, that's harder to gain a perspective or anything from, especially when languages are often made up, characters aren't human, they're using technology that we don't have. Those type of things are harder to then quantify to a not so niche group in social environments and conversations. Where if you're really big into romance novels, right, you can join tons of book clubs and, you know, fan groups of romance novels, which is a bigger population than more niche groups of science fiction. And I'm not picking on science fiction. I just don't understand it, like I said. Comic-Con's a thing. It's one of the biggest conventions of the year. And, you know, so they get their love. They have their hive and their people and their tribe, and I respect it. But I say you see the way that they are shunned as people who try to escape life and who want to not deal in the realities of things. That's all I'm warning against. Don't become a person who's lost touch with the fact that you are not dealing in reality anymore. If you are standing in line for hours dressed up as a fucking stormtrooper, hit me up, dude, because I'll help you. I'll give you other shit to do. If you're showing up to a movie theater to stand in line for 8 hours to watch Kristen Stewart and Robert Pattinson kiss their pale asses on top of a tree, holla at your boy. I got you. But again, if in your time when you have free time, you want to escape and go there and be a part of that, nothing makes me happier in my free time life than when I've pulled my nose out of a book and I go, oh shit, 3 hours gone. I was so here and in that, and I don't feel guilty about it because like I gained this whole like culture of style of people, and I was in a coffee shop, and then we were talking by a car, and I was there. I was in that. Almost more than you can when you're in a movie because, again, it's all being presented for you. There's a lot of benefits. There's a lot of benefits to reading fiction. And I'll close by saying this. Fiction allows interpretation that nonfiction cannot. This is true for all art. When you have a fictional book, I can read it, you can read it. I can like it, you cannot like it, but at the same token, we can look at a single point of dialogue in the book and go, this is what I took from that. And they go, this is what I took from that. When we're studying things like history and war and things like that, dialogue could be seen as hearsay in the legal form, but in more fact of the matter is when you're reading a book, there was a happening and a what happened after. In fiction, we don't always get the what happened after. Sometimes the book always ends. Sometimes without closure. Almost always unless it draws itself out, like one of the Colleen Hoover series I just ran, the Slammed series by Colleen Hoover. It ran its course out and overstayed its welcome. You, by book 1, you were like, I gotta have more of this. Book 2, you were like, I would like more of this. Book 3, hard disappointment. You're like, I've had enough of this. Because there was nothing left to interpret. There was nothing left to want to see happen. When everything happens, it's like a TV series that runs for way too long. Big Bang Theory, one of my favorites. And again, that is the most sci-fi I get, is Big Bang Theory. So I know first, everyone in the science fiction community, sci-fi community, was all about that show. And then apparently it was like, not all of us like it. We actually think it's really offensive. I am not about shaming, stigmatizing people who like science fiction. I want to acknowledge the fact that fiction allows people to find what is for them. I'm not good at certain conversational escaping to a galactic universe or a dark, wooded, fairy-infested, gnome-battling thing when a witcher is trying to find me. I'm going, wait, what? I need Mark meets Andrea, little town. They have, their ups and downs. They fall in love. Big bang in the middle. Ending. We'll see what happens. With a big plot twist or two, not too many. That's my bag. That's my easy day listening, right? That's my, I'm strolling through my book. I'm chilling. Every morning, I start my morning with 30 minutes of philosophy, nonfiction. So that way my mind is going, okay, I've learned. So I'm not trying to learn here. That's one of the things. When you start to judge yourself and you go, well, I'm not learning anything. I'm reading all these books. I have quite the library, but none of it's real. And you go, So do this. Counteract. If you know you're reading 4 hours of books, and, most of us are funny with how we divide our time, I probably spend 2/3 of my time physically reading. 1/3 of the time of reading is on audiobooks when I'm in the car and stuff like that, or I'm climbing or something. I listen. But I've really come to enjoy physically reading because I like that feeling of, I can't get enough of this. Oh, how much more do I have in this chapter? Oh, that much. Okay. And I like that. It gives me that. So if you find a nonfiction through a fictional book that you read and you go, oh shit, I want to learn more about Seattle, Washington, or I want to learn more about Greek mythology, or I want to learn more about the Holocaust or whatever, because you read a book about it and you go, okay, well, let me start my day. 30 minutes, nonfiction, I'll get the learning out of the way. So then if you're like me and you have to rationalize productivity to yourself, go, now I've been productive right out the gate. Now I can shamelessly and guilt-free sit and read my book and escape. I've done the work for the day. This is the last thing I'll say. I highly encourage everyone to get themselves a notebook. This is just my general, what I call my dump book. I have now like 4 or 5 different fucking journals, but this is just my dump book. So I keep this around at all times. And even if it's just an idea I have, any ideas that I have of inspiration, quotes I like from fiction books will go in here. Any review notes that I take on the books, I put them in here. Then I have another one out there that I keep notes and in for nonfiction, and words that I look up for new definitions go in that book. So again, start to get a little balance in your life. If you're full tilt fiction, come back to earth, baby. If you're full tilt nonfiction, gain a little art in your life, baby. See what I'm saying? And I'm going to see you guys in the next one. Thumbs up the video. Be a good little boy and girl. Thumbs up the video. Subscribe. Ring the bell. I love you guys very much. We'll see you in the next one.